Hello, welcome everyone to Industry Insiders, a holistic view of the publishing industry from pencil to shelf. My name is Sarah Capdeville. I'm here on behalf of Montana Book Festival. The Montana Book Festival acknowledges that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people. The name Missoula comes from the Bitter Salish word Inmesulejo, which means place of freezing water. This name has been used for over 12,000 years, since the existence of Glacial Lake Missoula. The first Europeans who came here borrowed the Salish term Inmesulejo and modified the word to Missoula. Later, when Glacial Lake Missoula melted, Bitter Salish began using an additional term for Missoula, which means place of the small bull trout. In 1855, the Bitter Salish were forced to sign the Hellgate Treaty. Following this treaty, the United States government carried out forced assimilation, removal, and genocide against the Salish and other peoples in their efforts to acquire land. Yet despite centuries of colonial theft and oppression, the Tatayakan people are still here and thriving on their Aboriginal lands. The Montana Book Festival strives and will continue to strive to help promote Indigenous voices as one of the ways our organization acknowledges and respects the Aboriginal peoples of Missoula. For those of you zooming in from outside Missoula, I encourage you to take a look at the link I'll shortly put in the chat so you too know whose Aboriginal territories you're currently living on. We are really excited to welcome Emily Ruskovich, Julie Stevenson, Joey Paxman, and Mara Panich to this year's virtual festival. But I want to first take care of a little housekeeping. First, due to technical limitations on my end, we're unable to offer live transcription for today's event, for which I sincerely apologize. We'd also like to welcome you as attendees to submit your questions to our authors via the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I am on hand to read your questions and will pass them along to our panelists about midway through the event. Rest assured, I am seeing your questions. Feel free to use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves while the event is taking place. I will be monitoring both the Q&A and the chat for questions. The Montana Book Festival wishes to thank our event sponsors, Arts Missoula and the Whitefish Review. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our panelist. Emily Ruskovich grew up in the mountains of northern Idaho. In 2019, she became the fourth American to win the International Dublin Literary Award for her debut novel, Idaho. Idaho has also won the Pacific Northwest Book Award, the Idaho Book Award, and has been optioned for a film. She's a graduate of the University of Montana, the University of New Brunswick, and the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her work has appeared in Zoetrope, One Story, the Paris Review, the Virginia Quarterly Review, the New York Times, the Guardian, and elsewhere. A winner of the O. Henry Prize for Short Fiction, Emily currently teaches at the University of Montana in its MFA program. She lives in the mountains of Alberton with her husband and two small daughters. Julie Stevenson, Emily. Julie Stevenson was an agent at Sobel Webble Associates and Waxman Level Literary before joining Massie McQuilkin. She received her bachelor's degree in English literature from Washington University in St. Louis and an MFA in creative writing from Sarah Lawrence College in New York. She also worked in the editorial departments of Tin House and Publishers Weekly. She is drawn to fiction with unforgettable characters, an authorial command of voice, and a strong sense of narrative tension. She loves outsiders, weirdos, and innovators. She looks for work that explores the depths of human experience and the many facets of ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, social class, and regional backgrounds. Julie loves editing and contemplating craft and storytelling with clients. She takes pride in connecting writers with editors and ultimately with readers. She's agented books that have won the Pulitzer Prize, the MWA Edgar Award, the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, the Carnegie Medal for Excellence, and the Tim McGinnis Award for Humor. She represents literary and upmarket fiction, suspense and thrillers, memoir, narrative nonfiction, and young adult. Joey Paxman has been a resident of Missoula since 2015. Joey has over a decade of experience working in the book trade and is currently a nonfiction editor for the independent publisher PM Press. When he's not buried in manuscripts, he can usually be found chasing upland birds with his pack of pointing dogs. Mara Panich is a writer, artist, and bookseller in Missoula, Montana. She holds a BA in creative writing and English literature from Purdue University and completed postgraduate studies at the University of Montana. She is the author of Blood is Not in the Water, Foothills Publishing 2021, and her work has been published in Cutbank Online, The Bitchin' Kitsch, Awaken the World, B2, Women Under Scrutiny, We Leave the Flowers Where They Are, and other anthologies. And with that, I will let you all take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us, and I'm so happy to be joining these amazing people working in the industry to talk to everybody today. So we thought we would just sort of go in order. Each of us has about 5 minutes of information before we open it up to Q&A to just talk about our roles in the publishing process. So I'll start just because I'm at the very beginning of that process, being an author. And so my path to publication, maybe it's more usual than I know, but you guys can tell me. But it's kind of an unusual story. I didn't know anything about publishing. I've never wanted to be anything else aside from a writer since I was a very little girl. But even in grad school, I didn't know what literary agents were, and I didn't know that I would ever need one, and I didn't know at all how the process worked of publishing a book. I just knew that I would pursue it with everything that I had, and that I wasn't in. I was very lucky in that I wasn't under a lot of pressure to publish. I know that my students feel that pressure. I teach at the graduate level, and they often talk about this pressure to publish. And I wasn't like that because I was very naive, and I was very my pursuit was very romantic and idealistic and quite innocent. And in a lot of ways, I'm really glad for that, because I never wrote. I always intended to reach a wider audience. I always wanted that. That was what I wanted. But day to day, the writing was not about a wider audience. It was just about me, and it was about more so the characters. When I think about who I really write for myself and I write for my family. But the people that I mostly write for, I realize are my characters. It's as if they are people who are, trapped in another dimension almost, and that they need me to give them voices and get them out into the world. And so I didn't care so much when I published. I ended up getting very lucky and publishing when I was young, but I didn't care if I published when I was 30 or 50 or 70. I had this goal, this dream, that if I just got one book out in the world at some point in my life, I would have achieved the goal of my entire life. And so all that I cared about was that the book that I tried to publish was good. I wanted to love my book. And so I was not in a rush. I was totally devoted to the project of it. So I worked a long time without feeling scared, even though I knew, like, at some point I'm going to have to enter this process that I don't understand, and I'm going to try to do this. But I didn't focus on that day to day. Every day I just approached my writing as its own soul that I needed to be with. And so anyway, eventually I wrote a story that was different than all other stories I'd ever written. It was just much better. It was much truer and more honest and more mature. And I gave this story to Jinnah at the Wiley Agency when she came for a visit at the University of Iowa, where I was studying. And she signed with me based on that one story, and eventually went on to sell the story as one part of a collection of stories, one story in a collection. And so I was thrilled. It was the best thing that had ever happened to me at that point in my life, was to sell this collection of stories with the promise of a novel to come. And so we worked together. My agent worked really hard with me as like an early editor, and then my editors worked with me, very, very hard. And we got the collection to a point that everybody was happy with it. But there was this one part of me that was not happy with it. It was, I felt that it was very strong, but I couldn't put my finger on why I was sad about this being the book that was going to break like my lifelong silence with the world. And I didn't know what that was. And it went all the way to copy editing. And, I was very excited. And I just thought, like, I wish I just loved my book a little bit more. And then right before, I had a publication date and everything, was going to press. And then sort of at the last moment, my editor called me and she said, Emily, are you sure this first story isn't the beginning of a novel? And the moment she said it, I realized that was what was wrong, that there were all these voices in me from that first story that hadn't even made their way onto the page yet. And I realized that there was this novel waiting and like wanting out so badly. And I said, yes, let's stop. And so we stopped the publication of that book, which still, hasn't been published. And I devoted the next 5 years of my life to writing a novel that continued from that first story. And I'm so glad that I did. Every day I'm so grateful that I didn't rush it. And I didn't, I was so excited to be an author out in the world. But the most important thing that I learned was just that you grow, like with everything that you write, you become a slightly different person. And I wasn't really, my book was not ready. It was not the right book until I got to a certain point in my life. And I'm so glad I didn't rush it. And I took my time and I devoted myself to these characters because I would be so heartbroken if they weren't out in the world. Anyways, so when I worked on that book, I knew it was sold. I knew that it would be published. And so for the first time in my life, there was a new pressure on the book. And I just did my best as I wrote to remember the original starting point for this novel, which was myself and my family and my characters. And I guess that was my journey to publication.
Wow, that's an amazing story, Emily, that you actually stopped the presses and decided that it wasn't, the collection wasn't ready. That's really unusual in my experience.
I wondered if it was unusual. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it is. But I think that's such a wise decision on the part of your editor and your agent and your decision to just go with the work that felt the strongest and that you felt like there was something that, that you needed to wait and sort of put a different voice forward first. And I don't know, it's just really, I think it's so important to wait until the work is ready, until it's the work that you want to put out into the world. Even if it means, like stopping the presses, which is unusual, but then, your novel's just such an incredible debut. So congratulations on that. And I thought I would just talk about the process from a literary agent's point of view. So and I just wanted to thank the Montana Book Festival too. I love this festival. I try to be a part of it every year because it's, fosters a literary culture in our hometown of Missoula and our state of Montana and to everyone who's listening. So thank you to everyone who's volunteered really to put this together. I appreciate it. So as I'm a literary agent, and I think that's really interesting what you said, Emily, about not kind of knowing what a literary agent did or sort of what the publishing process was like when you were a student, because I felt the same way. I went to Sarah Lawrence, I got my MFA in fiction, and I had no idea what the rest of the process was like either. I had a collection I wanted to write, and I had been writing my whole life too. And so kind of as I was finishing my collection in graduate school, I met with an agent and I started doing an internship at Tin House Magazine. And I learned about kind of this other part of publishing, the business side, how does the work get into the world? And I just became really intrigued by that process of reading the slush pile, which is what I did quite a bit for Tin House Magazine. And just, reading stories from some really famous writers, unknown writers, and just sort of everything, coming at me at the same time and getting to sort of experience that work for the first time. And I fell in love with that process. And I think I sort of approach it as a writer. So, I mean, as a writer's sensibility, I'm always kind of looking for a voice or a story that intrigues me and that, won't let me go. And that's what I was trying to understand, what a writer does through doing my own writing. And also, once I started working at Tin House, I had sort of a different dimension to that in terms of being a reader. And I just really loved that whole process. I was living in New York, and I of course needed a job after graduate school, and decided to go into agenting. There's quite a long apprenticeship when you're a literary agent, so it takes um, quite a few years of just kind of being an assistant. So I was hired as an assistant at a literary agency. And once again, reading the slush pile, kind of learning about, how does an agent represent a writer? How does the agent search for talent? And what are the kind of interactions that the agent has with the writer and with the publisher? And all of the sort of the contract and sub rights. So just all of the kind of businessy parts of it I learned as an assistant at a literary agency, and that was Sobel Weber. But I knew, as I got deeper into agenting, I knew I wanted to agent myself and to really have the ability to bring forth voices and work that I felt was important and exciting, and to try to share that with, with an audience, with readers. And it's really challenging to do that as if to go off on your own as an agent, or to join an agency as a full-fledged agent, because you don't have a salary. So you are taking a big creative risk to, kind of read the work and hope to find something that can sell. And so there's a lot of risk involved in terms of being an agent, but it was something that I felt was important, and I felt a passion for. So, I started at Sobel Weber. I worked with Viet Tong Nguyen on his first novel, The Sympathizer. And he had a short story collection too, that I read first. That was one of the first things the first work of his I read in our slush pile. It was a story collection, which is now called The Refugees. And I fell in love with that, with his voice and with those stories. And then the policy of our agency was that the writer really needed a novel first. And so we asked him to set that aside and wait, and, try to, come up with a novel that we could put on submission. And that novel was, The Sympathizer. So it was a really exciting time to work with him on those early drafts, and, be a part of the process of putting it on submission, and kind of just watching that, go through all of the stages it went through. And I've seen now so many writers that I work with go through similar processes or different process. With Viet Tong Nguyen, it was, we only had one small offer, which he talks about a lot, but, a lot of rejection for the Sympathizer in the beginning. And I always say, like, if there's one yes, then that door opens, and then you have a chance to, kind of move on to the next stage and find an audience, and find, readers who will respond to your work and your voice. And so we had one yes from Grove. And with that, the sort of the rest is history. It went on to get really amazing reviews and win prizes, and reach a wide audience. And then, I think he also had a chance to kind of really change the discourse in terms of talking about diversity in publishing, and sort of owning a narrative as a person of color and as a refugee and a writer in the US. So it was really exciting just to kind of see that progression. And for me, then I was able to move on from Sobel Weber and really kind of go off on my own as an agent. And I started with an agency called Waxman Level, and then I moved to this agency I'm with now that I love, called Massie McQuilkin. And we handle fiction and nonfiction, and some children's books, some YA. So I do myself I represent a variety of kinds of work. And I'm always just looking for, you know, a story that pulls me in. So it's a voice and it's a story and it's sort of an immediate engagement with the work. And so I'm still reading a lot of submissions and, you know, kind of trying to test my judgment on the work that I'm reading and really feel if I respond to it as a reader. If I do, then that's how I know I want to take it on. So that's, yeah, you know, and then as an agent, we put a work on submission once we feel that it's ready. So sometimes there are, you know, edits to do. And then when it's ready, we put it on submission, we submit it to publishers. And then, you know, in my case, I try for sort of the larger major trade publishers and some of the big independents and smaller independents. I kind of do a mix of publishers when I'm putting something on submission, but sometimes we'll get, you know, like a bidding war, or, you know, there'll be like 2 or 3 offers or more for a book. And then it's the agent's job to field those offers and, you know, kind of run that auction and help the writer decide, you know, between the multiple offers and talk to different editors and have those kinds of conversations. And really think about the writer's vision and the editor and publisher's vision, and if they align. So that's part of that process. And then there's contract negotiation and sort of the fine points of a contract that I work on with the publisher. And then there's the shepherding the book through the entire rest of the process. So, you know, there's the editing with the editor, there's promotion and publicity, and then there's the pub date and the sort of launch of the book. And so I'm there as the agent and as, you know, sort of the advocate for that writer through that whole process, and hopefully through the writer's entire career. And that's kind of agenting in a nutshell.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Emily. So I have to say, first off, I feel definitely humbled to be on the panel with the 3 of y'all. And in some ways, as the publisher, I can't help, you know, after hearing, you know, Emily's kind of story and Julie, and of course, I know Mara quite well, and you know, I feel a little bit as a publisher, kind of like the vampire of the group, and that, you know, you'll do, you know, you put your life's passion into this, and then it comes to the publisher, right? And we do our best not to suck the life out of the book. So what do? So I work, my official title is editor at an independent publishing company called PM Press. Now we primarily publish nonfiction, a lot of history, politics, philosophy, social movements, social justice kind of stuff. But we also do publish quite a bit of fiction. You know, we have a whole science fiction line, and we do everything from larger authors like Ursula K. Le Guin, we've, you know, published her, to people that you've just never heard of. But on my side of things, I work really primarily on the nonfiction side of things. So as an editor, I actually have a very old school editorial position. And by old school, I mean, I actually work with the book and the author for the entire life of the book. Nowadays, in a lot of publishing, everything is very neatly kind of compartmentalized and even outsourced. And by outsourced, I mean some companies even outsource their copy editing to third world countries. We do everything in-house. We're very old school. We're kind of a publishing company of 100 years ago. So my role is, first of all, wading through manuscripts. Now, manuscripts come to us in a number of ways. A lot of them are just blindly submitted directly through the author. Some through agents, of course. But either way, my first job is to literally go through manuscripts and start trying to figure this out. From there, when you find a manuscript that you're interested in, then, as Julie said, a very important part before you even start with contract negotiations, it's really important to identify, how does this manuscript fit with the publishing company? And how do I fit as an editor with the author. No matter how good the book is, if it doesn't jive, I can tell you it does not do anybody any amount of good. There has to be some sort of logical fit there. So after that is then figured out, then contract negotiations, as Julie mentioned. From contract negotiations, then it's time to decide, first of all, how finished is the book? Is it a complete manuscript that's pretty much ready to go? Is it something that's still very much so in the developmental stage? And so a lot of that has to be figured out. But nevertheless, let's just, for the sake of convenience, the book is ready to go. The first thing I work on with the author is putting together all the critical details. So I'm working with the author on the cover design, on the actual title of the book, the subtitle of the book. You know, the author might come with a title. And again, this is where as a publisher, we try not to screw these things up, but we inevitably might have different ideas. You know, I mean, I hate to say it, but we do come from it strongly from a marketing perspective. You know, we as an independent publisher, we have more flexibility where we can take more risks. You know, we're willing to take on something that actually doesn't have any amount of, you know, so-called marketability. But nevertheless, we're going to have to market the book. So everything needs to come together before the book is officially what is called announced to the book trade. And announcements are a very formal process, and they're tedious. I won't bore you with all the details, but before a book can be officially announced to the book trade, we need to have the cover design, we need to have the rough page count, we need to come up with what the list price is going to be. We're going to have the ISBN already for the book, and then it's announced to the book trade. The book trade works in a few different seasons. I won't go into the weeds there, but if a book is, say, announced in the fall of 2021, it's generally then going to be a fall 2022 release. And during that time is when we'll shore up all the copy editing, the proofing, the laying out of the book. And it's also during that time that we're going to be very heavily, you know, very aggressively marketing the book. And that's something I do. So I'm involved as the editor, involved in this process the entire time. And there's several other people. The agent, as Julie said, is going to be involved. The author is going to be very, very much so involved in this whole process. So at that point, we're going to really start marketing the book. Our distributor, most publishers, well, every real publisher, I don't want to say real, I don't mean a snobby way, but we all have a distributor, right? And so PM Press, we're with PGW, that's Publishers Group West, who is under Ingram. And so we have meetings with all their sales reps over there, you know, so we give them the whole rundown. This is the fall list. This is exactly what the book is about. Here are your talking points. Here's, and they start pushing all of their pre-orders too. So pre-orders are pretty important for a book. I know for larger publishers, that really kind of determines how much effort they're really ultimately going to put into that book. They're looking pretty closely at pre-orders. For us as an independent publisher, once we decide to do the book, we're going to put everything into it. Again, it doesn't matter. We're not going to say, oh, this book, you know, I already know it's not going to be a New York Times bestseller, so I'm not going to push it. Like, we're going to push it hard. But pre-orders are still important because it helps inform things such as the first print run. How many books are we actually going to print? Well, being that it's an economy of scale, meaning the more books you print, it lowers the price. Anyway, we try to determine how many pre-orders can we realistically expect. And then at that time, we're also going to start setting up our book launches. I work with authors to write editorials to get placed in newspapers, journals. So one of the things as an editor, I have to look for opportunities. So for our nonfiction books, for example, if we're working on a book that's dealing with, I don't know, global refugees, it's in the news, you know, I have to recognize these moments and then get the author like, can you turn out, 5,000 words, connecting your book to what is going on right now. And then we'll work with the agent, work with let's get this place fast. Can we get this into the New Yorker magazine? So there's a lot of legwork that goes into that until the book finally comes out. Yeah, so that's my role in all of this. Again, there's a lot more to it, and hopefully anybody listening in will have lots of questions for us. But I'm gonna leave it at that and turn it over to Mara.
Hi everyone, I'm Mara. I'm the owner of Fact and Fiction Books, and I'm kind of the endpoint right before the book gets into the hand of the reader. It's interesting because I think we all kind of started out as writers and followed our own little weaving paths to just loving books. I started working in the trade book industry in about 2007. I also spent some time in the textbook industry, being a buyer at the University of Montana. And my role here is actually right after Joey presents to all those sales reps, they all come to me and try to sell me different books. And I look at thousands upon thousands of titles each season, deciding what to bring into my store, which book, why this book will be on the shelves in Missoula, Montana, and why it will sell to my customers in Missoula or beyond. But and then there's other routes also, but with that's the biggest part is figuring out which books, because the sales reps do good job, they're good at their jobs. And there's so many wonderful books out there, and I only have so much space. And finding out which books to put on the shelf is the combo of an art and a science. And we have to get those pre-orders in, so the books are printed at proper numbers and everything. We also have authors come directly to us, mostly through more self-published or smaller presses. Of course, all three of you I've met in the store coming in and saying, hello, I'm this is a new book I have out or whatnot, and that helps. Not sure what else to say about what we do. And then we just sell the heck out of the books we love.
We're glad that you do.
Right.
I know I bring
Thank
Mara
you.
every time I have every season, I bring her a stack of whatever books I'm representing. So, and she usually stocks them. So thank you, Mara.
Thank you.
I do want to say that independent bookstores such as Fact and Fiction, I mean, this might seem trite to people listening in, but it can't be overstated that we cannot do what we do without them. I don't care how much Amazon dominates the industry. I don't care about the big ones. We would not exist. None of us would exist without bookstores such as Fact and Fiction. And I hope people keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Joey.
100%. It's not just it's the store, and it's the book culture too. I think there's really something to be said for, being able to go into a store and talk to a bookseller about books, about, we all share a passion for reading and for literature, and to have that community in an independent bookstore it's really invaluable.
Yeah, I always think about bookstores as the centers of the town. Whenever I go somewhere new, that's where I go I don't know anything about this town. Let's find the bookstore. Let's find the independent bookstore. And you get to know a town, I think, through that bookstore. And it's just to be in that space and see the books there on the shelf. It's so different than shopping online. It's magic. It's a pastime that's very relaxing and very grounding. And you know, it's just I think a much more beautiful way to let a book enter your life is to seek it out at a bookstore.
Yeah. And just like all the events too. I mean, there's so many different events that I've gone to because, you know, it's the fact and fiction has been a part of it, or just that's also another way to kind of connect is through these events and other author events where you sort of get to go and hear a writer read their work in person. I think that's, or online if we're in the pandemic, but.
I guess I'll say one thing about that with authors. Like I would guess that a lot of the audience is writers trying to figure out the process and everything. And, you know, to Emily's point, a local bookstore will show you what the town's about, because they're going to represent what the town's about. But also, like, as a writer, if you're going and you're trying to get a book published, or you're having a book published soon, there is nothing better than an independent bookseller to get your work out there and making friends, no matter what city you're in, no matter what bookstore, making friends with your independent booksellers. They can bring a book from, if you have one of these big publishers that's not putting a lot of marketing into it, independent booksellers are a network, and they will hand sell, and they can bring a book back from no sales if they love it.
Yes.
So
key.
I think we've got a question.
Yeah, so we've got a couple questions. This first one is for Joey. When thinking of buying a book, how do you balance your gut feel for an audience that you know exists and a book that might hit or create a new audience? Do you prefer to play it safe with a known bet, or do you prefer to break new ground with a new book? These are great questions, so keep them coming either in the Q&A or the chat.
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. And it looks like it's from Ryan Bussey, whom I've never met in person, but this is another Montana writer from Kalispell whose new book Gunfight is coming out this October. So I'm doing a shameless plug here, even though I have no connection whatsoever. I really don't, but I can tell everybody you need to read this book.
Yes,
and I believe Ryan's also going to be doing something for the Montana Book Festival as well. So definitely check him out and check out that book. But here's his question. So how do you balance your gut feel for an audience you know exists? So this actually is definitely a huge thing that's always you're always considering. So here's one deep dirty secret about the book trade in general. And feel free to contradict me. Julie, you might disagree with me, but I'm going to say that most publishers don't really know. There's no formula on how to sell a book. There is not. And there's not even really necessarily a good way to predict it. And that's why a lot of big publishers take on as much as they can, looking for the one book to stick. And I don't mean to sound negative about that, but it's kind of true. Like that's what they're doing. Take on as much as you can, find that one book that sticks, that sells 1 million copies, and it subsidizes the rest of the list for the year. So on the one hand, I do look for books where I'm like, yeah, that's something that's popular right now. However, as an independent publisher, it's not just economics, it's also a matter of I guess integrity. I'm kind of looking for books that I think could remain in print for the rest of my life, right? Books that are always going to remain relevant in some way. I'm not really interested in doing something that's just going to be thrown away. You know, it's going to be top 40 radio, right? And then it's gone. I really do want books that are going to endure. And with that said, there still are stuff that I know, hey, this is popular right now. So I am going to look at that very, very closely, but I'm also going to look at the writing itself and make sure, yes, it's popular right now, but will it endure? Is it well written? Is it well argued? Is the research solid there? So that is one thing, is that I will go with, okay, I know the audience already exists, but then even then there, can us, you know, the publishing company I work for, can we tap into that audience? And that goes back to making sure this is the right fit. You know, I might know that, yes, there's an audience for that book. It's not our audience though. We don't have the capability to really sell that book. So then I may have to pass for it. But now the more interesting question is, Ryan asks, do you prefer to play it safe in the known bet, or do you prefer to break new ground with a new book? And that is really the exciting part of publishing for me. That's what we really want to do, is break new ground, find new exciting authors who are exploring exciting things. Now, not just for the sake of itself. It's not one of those like, oh, I just want the newest, the coolest, right? Or this is controversial and I'm just going to publish it for the sake of being controversial. Nothing like that. But I do want something that's not stale, something that's new. And with that, I guess it's just a matter of, okay, we'll do this, but let's be realistic about it. And then that's a matter of, you know, talking to the agent, talking to the author, and letting them know very honestly, like, this is a risk for us. It might bomb, you know, just so you know. This is what we're capable of doing. If you need to shop it around more, try to sell it to someone else. But it's a matter of kind of being honest, you know, this is what we're capable of doing. And with that, I really look closely at the authors themselves, not just the book. I want to know how, and this is an important thing that I'm sure everybody can speak to. I really want to work with dynamic authors who want to be invested in their book and want to be invested in the process. The reality these days is that there's not, again, not to be negative, but there's not a lot of readers compared to even 50 years ago, right? And so a book is not going to sell itself, right? And so I really want to work with an author who is willing to get out there, willing to push it. I don't mean going on tour and stopping in every city, but having the resources, having the wherewithal, having the kind of personality to do that. I hate to say it, but sometimes we do even look at like, well, what's their social media presence? You know, I'm working with a book right now that just came out, and the person, it's their first published book. They started pushing it on Twitter, and literally overnight sold over 1,000 copies, just retweets on Twitter. I mean, that can't be ignored. I hate that, but it can't be ignored, you know? So that's something we're kind of looking for. So yeah, I don't know if that necessarily answers all of Ryan's question, but it's kind of a mix. We do both.
It's a good question. I actually am Ryan's agent, I'm happy to say. So and I know, you know, with Gunfight, that is a book, it's really interesting because I think that is a book that there is an audience for it. It's really about Ryan's experience in the gun industry as a gun salesman, and building this company Kimber from this little, you know, company in Portland that made really high-end, beautiful guns, rifles and handguns, to, you know, kind of building Kimber, but also kind of growing up in the gun industry and seeing some really dramatic changes that, you know, as Ryan grew into that industry, he became less comfortable with, in terms of sort of the far right mentality and the way that the industry embraced, you know, military style weapons and really pushed those into the public arena. And so, you know, I think Ryan, just as a person of conscience, wrote a book about what it's like to sort of try to have your own opinion in an industry that is really forcing you to sort of toe a conservative line that he didn't feel comfortable with, and that he felt was dangerous. And, you know, when he needed to speak out, he was going to be, you know, punished for that within his circle, within his industry. And so, I mean, I think the book that Gunfight is a very brave book to write in terms of speaking out, and you know, he had to walk away from his career in order to write it. And we had to, you know, we didn't know if there would be a publisher. I mean, we took a chance to see, you know, if once we had a proposal, if publishers would see the audience that we hoped they would see in it. And once again, we had, you know, one publisher in particular that absolutely saw the value in his work and in his writing and in his story. Not everybody did. I mean, publishing is as full of rejection as, you know, as we all know, we've experienced it. You put your work out there, it often is rejected. Often people don't see the value or the audience or, you know, the sort of purpose for the work. And it takes one person sometimes with a vision and an editor and a publisher to sort of put forth that vision. And I think that, you know, now it's really kind of fun to sort of have this moment where there's so much interest in Gunfight, and it publishes in October, and there's definitely, you know, going to be a big audience for it. So sometimes you take a risk, and then you have to sort of push through and see what the future holds for a book. But I think it also depends on the writer, very much so, like being, you know, as active as possible and pushing their work out there into the world, and finding ways to talk about it and share it, and not being shy about that. And being, you know, just looking for ways to have conversations about your work, because it really does come down to two or three people, you know, like the writer, the publicist, and the agent, sort of looking for those opportunities. Emily, you probably have been through some of that with your publication of Idaho, in terms of knowing how to promote your own work or talk about your work and sort of get it out there into the world.
Yeah, giving readings. I feel like my book is sort of, people love it or they hate it, and it's, you know, because the subject matter is on the surface very, very dark. It's about the murder of a little girl, you know, by her mother, and so it's the worst thing that I can imagine. But it's about grace and love and forgiveness and light, and so I think sometimes people are weary to pick up a book when they know that subject matter is so intense, but meeting me and letting me talk about why I've written this book, and you know, just answering questions, I find makes people feel safe, and makes people feel like if they do buy my book, they will be in the hands of somebody, you know, an author who isn't a dark person, like that I've written, you know, with my best intentions and with love. And I do think, like, there have been many occasions when I've sort of changed people's minds, even about the book, you know, about, you know, people who are reading it and they're in the middle of it and think it's really dark, and then I'm able to speak about it, which I'm not, you know, I'm only able to do that every now and then at a reading or whatever, but it does mean a lot to me to be able to connect to readers and just talk about this whole mystifying process of not just publishing a book, but of writing one, and where that comes from, and why we write the things that we write. It's sometimes not really a choice. In which, you know, my book wasn't really a choice about what I wrote. It was the thing that I had to discover and experience and get through. It was it was the thing that, like, captured my soul, and I couldn't look away from it. Yeah, and I don't have a big social media presence. I don't have a social media presence at all. I'm not on anything, and I have wondered if I would sell more books if I were. But from my perspective, even if I were to sell more books being on social media, I find social media harmful in general to the writing process. I think that social media is excellent once you've gotten to the point where you are publishing and advertising your book, but one of the things I tell all of my students is just, if you want to improve your writing, just get off social media immediately. You know, I think because I think it can be distracting. And I think that when you're in the early stages of writing, that thinking so much about publishing and networking can just cause a ton of anxiety. And I just try to get students, I try to replicate my own experience in students as much as possible, because I really treasure that I wrote without anxiety. I wrote without the pressure to publish, and yeah, so that's my 2 cents on social media.
Yeah, I agree. I think in terms of a writer in that stage of writing, you just need to focus on the work and the writing, and yeah, and not worry about the rest. I mean, you know, it's you just can't worry about the rest, because it's all a sort of uncertainty in the future.
Yeah.
And really what matters is the work. And even, you know, even when I work with published writers, it's sort of, there's that anxiety about the next book and the next book, and you just have to come back, the writer has to come back to, you know, the reason for writing in the first place, and the story, and focusing on craft is key.
And not, I mean, I think the amount of competition that I see among my students, you know, who, not actually at this program, but at other programs I've worked at, just, it's very competitive. And I think it's so important just not to compare yourself to other people. Like, if a friend gets a book deal, that's like wonderful and amazing. And to just be, I mean, it's hard, to not feel like the pain of envy when you're working towards something, but it is like having a community that you just support, you know, and can be happy for, and just not to feel always the pressure to compete with your peers, I think also will just help your spirit. And if your spirit is okay, you're going to write more and you're going to write better. And I think that's really important.
I think that's great advice. Write your damn book, you know, develop your craft, and then worry about the other stuff, right? The publishing stuff, like, but do what you do first, and do it well.
Mm-hmm.
It does look like we have a couple more questions in the Q&A. Do you want me to just read them, and then we can go from there? Okay, anonymous attendee. Smaller/indie presses often have limited resources for promotion, so some of that work is then left to the author, who may not have the knowledge/connections to get the book in the hands of reviewers, etc. If you are an author publishing with a smaller press, what are the pros and cons of hiring a publicist?
I can take that one, because I advise people on whether or not to hire a publicist. And I would say most of the time, it's not really worth it to hire a publicist, but sometimes it is. So it really depends on, if you have extra resources, you know, and then you maybe don't want to do all of the work yourself of publicizing your book, then hiring a publicist can be great. But if you're hiring a publicist to sort of, you know, get a New York Times book review, or sort of get the sort of things in publishing that you are dreaming of, that's, and you're willing to just, you know, put all of your money into it, just don't do that. Don't go into sort of debt to try to hire a publicist or make your work, you know, a success. If a publicist would help, you know, sort of take a load off of you in terms of, you know, just sharing the word about your work, then that can be helpful. A good publishing publicist knows the book world. So, and it's really important to have those connections. And it's, in my experience, a really small group of people, like, you know, like maybe 10 that I would go to sort of line up a sort of independent publicist with the writer. And a lot of those publicists are in New York, and they're, you know, having drinks and meetings with, you know, reviewers and people, and they have those connections. And that's why they're able to really, you know, get a book onto the New York Times bestseller list, or, you know, help you kind of really get your book out there. I don't know. So at the same time, but independent presses really are short-staffed. And so often, as you probably know, Joey, like it's probably something that you might not have someone on staff to just be devoted to publicity for each of your writers. And
Yeah. So actually, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. We are a little more limited, and we happen to have somebody on staff. But my honest answer is, because I have a lot of authors who ask me that, they say, "Hey, I'll pay for a publicist." 9 out of 10 times, I actually tell them, don't do it. Like you're actually wasting your money. And again, you know, I could say, sure, do it. It's not coming out from the press. You're paying out of your own pocket. But I just tell them honestly, like, don't do it. You're gonna waste your money. I'd say half the time they don't listen to me. The authors go ahead and do it, and they spend a lot of money, and they're disappointed. You know, so as Julie said, there's probably only a handful of really good book publicists out there, and for different reasons. So I hate to say do your research, because what the hell does that even mean anymore? You know, we tell people, oh, do your research. Okay, well, I'm gonna take a cattle dewormer or whatever, you know. So it's kind of like, you do have to research a publicist though, right? Like you need to know what are they capable of, and really grill them. They need to be honest with you about what they're capable of doing, right? They really need to be honest. Like, what are they actually capable of doing? Try to read between the lines and really try to get an idea if they're just blowing smoke, because a lot of them will tell you all these things and then nothing happens, you know. So
the track record's really important.
Yeah.
What books have they worked on, and what kind of publicity have they been able to get for clients?
And as far as the track record, not just their wins, but were the wins with similar books. Like, yeah, they might have done great on, you know, translated Japanese poetry, but are they going to do well with your book, you know, The History of the Russian Revolution? Like, probably not.
Right. Yeah.
It looks like we have one more question and only 4 minutes left. Thanks to all the speakers. I love this. I was curious if they view attending an MFA program as necessary towards becoming a quote unquote successful author.
I can take this one. Teaching in an MFA program right now, no, it's not necessary to becoming a successful author. You know, writing comes from who you are, and MFA programs can't make you a writer. You know, people go to MFA programs because they already have a calling and they already have something within themselves that they feel, you know, is something that they can offer, and they want to make it better. And you know, I think an MFA program is just a wonderful place to be as a writer, because it's 2 years or 3 years in some cases to just be with other writers and devote yourself to your craft. And, you know, it's time, and time is everything when you're writing. And so they're very beneficial for that reason, mostly. And just, you know, when I think back at my time in an MFA program as a student, the things that I actually learned about writing weren't things that you could write on a board. It was more just being in the presence of people who had devoted their lives to something profound, made me want to write better. And so I did write better. But you certainly, it's not the only path, and it, you know, in some cases doesn't even help that much. I mean, I think it's all about the book. It's all about the, you know, the command of the language and of the story. And you can do that certainly without an MFA program, but MFA programs are fun and can be very helpful.
Mara, what was your MFA experience?
I don't have an MFA.
Okay, that's what
I was a master in English Lit. I have an undergraduate in creative writing, but I agree with everything Emily said. If you can afford it and that's where you want to be, what you want to be doing, and you can do that with your life. I know a lot of people with MFAs who have gained a lot from it, but I also know a lot of writers that never went through an MFA program, that just had a passion and they're talented and they worked hard on it and they make it happen. I've also known some MFA graduates who never ended up writing again after they completed programs. It kind of destroyed their passion for it. So, I mean, I think it's all individualized. That's, yeah.
Yeah. I would agree. I think one of the things I gained out of my MFA program was just becoming a reader. I mean, I think I was a reader before, but I loved the sort of conversations about craft and literature and reading literature with an eye, for as a writer, and just some of the reading lists that, professors would give us, which I had Carolyn Farrell as a professor at Sarah Lawrence, and she had such an amazing reading list for us. But I know as an agent, I work with people who have been through MFA programs and who have not. And so it's really, I think being a reader first and understanding, writing from the point of view of reading a lot and bringing that to the page.
And I mean, I feel like I have so much to thank my MFA program for. I feel like it did. By the time I graduated, I was a much, much better writer than I was at the beginning. And that was because of my specific teachers, and because of me and what I wanted, and, the peers that I met, and just being in workshop. It can be a bad experience. It's an imperfect process. Certainly it's like the best we have for learning how to write. But it can, you could have a bad workshop. And then the workshop that you have where somebody gives you an idea, which happened to me, with the novel that came to be. I remember this one man said, what if, XYZ happened? And I thought that is exactly what needs to happen. And it was just having that insight from your peers. If it's a well-meaning and loving workshop, it is really invaluable. So I don't want to downplay the benefits of an MFA. I just don't want you to feel that you have to do one, but I'm so glad I did mine.
Yeah. And I would agree that, like, even if you don't do an MFA, it's important to find a group of writers to just bounce your ideas off of, have as, a beta reader. I mean, I still find writers who are they've only sent their work to me, and they've never workshopped it or shared it with other people. And that's such an important part of the process, whether it's through an MFA program or just, because you can find some sort of writing group in your community and sort of trust the people that you're working with to read your work and to read their work, and to just, really writing is being part of a community. Mm-hmm. And that's important.
Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I know I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much to Emily, Julie, Joey, and Mara. Congrats on Idaho and Blood is Not the Water. And then thank you to everyone watching and participating. You've been such an amazing audience with such great questions. And then thank you also to our event sponsors, Arts Missoula and the Whitefish Review. Just as a reminder, you can purchase books by these authors and many others at Fact and Fiction Books in Missoula. Be sure to enter the code MBF when you check out on their website, factandfictionbooks.com, or you can vocally say the code MBF if you're buying books in store. I also urge you to purchase Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. There you can also donate so that we can continue our programming after the festival with our post-festival virtual events. Thank you all so much for coming. This has been great, and looking forward to further events in the festival. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.